Hello everybody. Welcome to the second part of my series of screencasts on making a Hacker News like site in Django. My name is Arun Ravindran and my site is arunrocks.com. I would like to thank everyone once again for the great feedback and the comments that you have been giving for part 1. I hope to continue with part 2, and in part 2 we are going to cover some interesting features. We are going to have a better look and feel for the site by using some design templates. We're going to have a custom login and logout. We're going to use some actual social features, and we're going to move towards registration, which is a user initiator registration rather than something that the admin initiates. And finally, the most exciting part, we are going to have user profiles, which is basically a page with the user information where you can actually go and see other users and their information as well. So in this particular screencast to follow, you need to use something called the goodies pack. The goodies pack is nothing but a set of assets that are designed by a designer. In this case, it's just me. It's not going to be a professionally designed one, but it would drastically improve the appearance of our website, which currently looks like this. So it's a basic HTML appearance. We'll try to slightly improve this. So first you need to download the goodies pack from a goodies location. So the location would be actually pasted on your YouTube description, or in case you're reading it, it should be on the blog itself. I'll show you how I'm going to use I'm going to download the zip file and unzip it on my operating system, which is Linux. First, let me go to the temp folder. I'm going to say wget, and I'm going to download this file. So once it's downloaded, I'm going to unzip it. It's going to be called master.zip, and I should be having a folder or a set of directories in the following structure. So it's having a lot of zip files, it's having a lot of HTML files, and it's going to be helping us to improve the appearance of our existing site. So how do we do that? Let's copy the static folder. So it's located at temp.srgoodies master static folder. This entire folder I'm going to copy to my project Steel Rumors folder. So if you remember, there's already a templates folder there. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to copy a specific file which is called base.html, which is our basis for, or probably the parent from which all the templates are inherited. So just change static to templates and call it base, and copy it to Steel Rumors templates folder. So once we have done these two changes, we should be able to see some improvements in the site's appearance already. But we do see, if we refresh, we do see that the site looks, we actually have an error message. So how do we solve this error message? It's because that we have not created something that's already defined in the template, which is the named URL called login. This is going to be a custom login page. Unlike our part 1, where we used the Django's built-in admin interface for logging in and logging out, we are going to be having a more realistic site-specific login and logout page. So let's open urls.py for that and add the login and logout URLs. So the regular expression starts. We have login / we're going to use a built-in view for this, django.contrib.auth.views.login, and we need one parameter for this view, which is going to be the template name. Let's pass that as well. template name. We haven't copied this template yet. It's going to be called login.html, and we're going to finally name this as login. So this is our first named URL, which is for logging in, and we're going to use a similar URL for logging out, which is going to be called logout at the location logout, and it's a very similar location. Instead of login, we are going to call logout then login. The advantage of using this view is that we don't need to define a separate logout page for a template. So let's remove that parameter. We don't need the template, and we're going to name this as logout. So that takes care of urls.py. Let's make some more changes in the settings.py and inform that these are the login and logout URLs. Let's go to settings, go somewhere near the installed apps. The location actually doesn't matter. We're going to have login underscore URL defined as a reverse lookup. In fact, a reverse lazy lookup to login. We haven't defined reverse lazy yet, but for our understanding, reverse lazy is nothing but a reverse lookup. We are not going to hard code the URLs here, which is not considered to be a good practice. It's against the do not repeat yourself principle of Django. We have to use reverse lazy instead of reverse because it's inside settings.py, and settings.py is usually loaded before everything else, so we cannot use reverse at this point. Instead, we use reverse lazy. So let's import that. URL resolvers reverse lazy. Let's define two more variable settings. One is login redirect URL, which I think should go to home, which is the location which happens after you log in. And then we have the logout URL, which of course we have defined as reverse lazy logout. And now all we have to do is copy the right template from the goodies pack. So let's go back to the goodies pack, and inside templates there should be login.html, and just copy it to templates. So let's refresh the browser to see if it worked. Wow, this looks much better, doesn't it? So as you notice, we are not using a CSS framework like Bootstrap. The reason I felt was I agree that Bootstrap is a great framework, but I feel that it has all the components that you probably don't need for this particular purpose. As you notice, the main.css is very small, quite light, and just contains enough information for us for our project. So I think it's fine. The next feature we would need is the ability for a user to register themselves as a new user. To do this, we are going to violate one of the rules which I set out in the beginning, that we would be using most of the Django's built-in features. But in this case, we are going to use an excellent package called Django Registrations. Now, Django Registrations is a very famous package by James Bennett. It's the de facto kind of application that most Django programmers use when you have to create a registration kind of workflow. We are going to use a very simple version of this. It's called the simple backend, and it's very easy to set up and easy to understand as well. However, we are not going to use the one that's available in the Python package index or pip. through pip. The reason being that because of user model changes in Django version 1.5, there have been a lot of incompatibilities with Django registration, even if you use the trunk at the moment of the screencast. So what I would suggest is for you to install from a forked version that I have maintained in my GitHub account. So the URL, and once again you would get the URL from the YouTube description or from the blog. So let's go back to our project directory, Steel Rumors, and let's install using pip install. This is the standard syntax for Git based repositories. As you can see, it shows an installation. Probably it realized that I have it already installed. So now we have Django Registrations installed as an application called registration. So let's go to settings and mention this particular application name, registration. So now we have wired in this application to Django. So let's run syncdb and ensure that the required models are created. So the models have been created now. Now we need to ensure that the required templates are present in the right folders. So as you might have guessed, it's already present in the goodies pack. So first we'll make this directory under templates called registration. As you would remember, each application needs to create its own directory under templates. So this is called registration. Now we are going to copy from our goodies pack a file called registration form. This would be copied to our newly created registration directory. So it looks like we are not able to find this location. Okay, it's probably because it's not fully written yet. Okay, so we were missing the L in the HTML. Now one last thing we need to do is to wire up the URLs in the urls.py. So let's do that as well. Let's go to urls.py and let's add that particular set of URLs that Django registration provides. Let's define URL. Start with accounts, and we are not going to define the ending, just the beginning, because it's going to be a set of URLs that starts with accounts, and we are going to include, using the include call, the registration views. So it's registration dot backends dot simple, because you're using the simple backend dot URLs. So now let's go and visit the URL which should be used for registering. So it says accounts/register/. I think we are facing an error here. It says URLs not defined. So that's because we didn't terminate it properly, or we didn't use the right function. So hopefully it should work now. Yes. So now we have a form in which we can fill any username and an example URL, an example email address, a password, and repeating the password, and click on register. Okay, so we are now reaching a page not found error. This is because we have not defined our users page for that particular user. If you notice, the user has been actually created, so there is a user called foo now. However, that user does not have a page. Now there are different ways of solving this problem, but I prefer creating a user profile page for each user. This is because we are interested in creating a social site, and if a user has a page which shows their interest or their information or their biodata, other users can also see this information, and this gives some background of what or who the user is. So let's do that. We'll actually create a user profile model in models.py. So this is a new model. Under links, go to models.py and you go all the way down and create a user profile. So user profile is nothing but a one-to-one a class which, or a model which has a one-to-one relationship with our built-in user model. So let's create that. Let's create a class variable called user. This would be actually a one-to-one relationship with our built-in user. One-to-one field user, and let's ensure that it's a unique one-to-one mapping. Once we've done that, of course, it is models. Once we have done that, we can define all the extra attributes here. In our case, we are just going to define one extra attribute, which is the bio, which could be a text field which does not have a size limitation, and you can write as much as you want about yourself in this particular field. However, one thing you have to remember is you have to either give it a nullable property, or we have to give a default value for that. The reason being, we'll see it in a moment. The reason being that user profiles are created generally without any arguments, and all the extra attributes must be in a proper state. If it's not nullable, or if it's not having a default state, it's not easy to create a model without any default elements. So let's create this with null equals true. And as always, let's define a Unicode representation. In this case, we're going to say the user. In this case, we're going to say the username profile. It's under self.user. So one hitch with this approach, which this is called actually the user profile model approach in Django. It's a very common pattern that you would see again and again. The only problem with this approach is that the user profile corresponding to a user might not be created. This is because it's not compulsory to have a user profile present at the time of creating a user. One way to ensure that a user profile is created is using signals. So signals are similar to callback mechanisms that you have seen in other languages, that you need to define a signal handler for a signal. In this case, saving a user is a signal that we want to catch. And let's define the signal handler first. It's called create profile. We have sender, we have instance, and we have created as a Boolean value, and we have some keyword arguments. This is the typical set of arguments that a signal handler takes. We first need to check if the process is that of creating the user. This is just a check, and we are going to have two return values. So you're going to say profile and created for get or create invocation of user profile. Let's write that first. User profile dot objects dot get or create, and the argument is of course the instance that has been passed. So it's user equals instance. This particular function returns a tuple, two return values, so that's why we have written profile and created. And we are not doing anything with them because all we are trying to ensure is that whenever this signal handler is called, a corresponding object, user profile object, is created here. And since we have ensured that most the extra attributes are nullable or having a default value, they should be in a sensible state while it's being created and not create any errors, for example. So next is catching or connecting the signal with the signal handler. So let's do that. Next, we need to import the signal first. So from django.db.signals, models.signals, we need to import post save. So post save can now be connected to its handler. postsave.connect, create profile, and the sender is the user model. So whenever the user model sends a postsave signal, we can ensure that this particular handler is called and the corresponding user profile object is created. So let's ensure that the models for this particular or the database objects for this particular model has been created using syncdb. Go and manage syncdb. Okay, so we have the tables created. Now we need to create the corresponding admin interface for this particular model. So let's go to admin.py. Now, unlike the previous admin models we created, we are not going to create a new model for user profile. Instead, we are going to extend the user admin existing or the default admin that's built into Django and just add our extra fields. Let's do that first, and let me explain why we do that in a moment. So let's import the user admin that's built into Django from django.contrib.auth.admin import user admin. We'll also need to import the get user model function instead of importing the user model. From django.contrib.auth import get user model. And we'll create the stacked inline object that's going to be inserted into the standard user admin. We'll call it the user profile inline, which is derived from admin.stacked inline. Stacked inline. And all we have to define here is what the model is. In this case, it is user profile. We need to import that. We also need to define whether it should be deletable. So we'll say that it's not deletable. Once we have done that, we can actually create the extended user admin model. We'll call it class user profile admin and extend it from user admin. Before we forget, we have to mention the inline elements that we just described. And as a last step, instead of registering our user admin as before, we are going to unregister the existing user admin and register our new user admin. So we are going to say admin.site.unregister first and say get user model. Now in previous versions this entire part used to be called user because we are going to unregister the user, but ever since Django 1.5 has been released, this is the recommended approach, because it's not always guaranteed that user is the user model in use. Similarly, we are going to register our get user model, and we are going to use user profile admin for this. So hopefully we should be having a user model, extended user model in our admin interface. Let's quickly check that. Now if you go to the admin part of the site, you'll be asked to log in again. This is because foo does not have permissions to use the admin part of the site. So we're going to use the admin login. Now as you notice, there's no separate users or user profiles. There's just the users model that used to exist before. Let's go to the admin user details. As you can see, there's a new section now, and this is having a bio field here. So you can simply write I am the admin or something like that and save it. If you go to any other user, you can actually see that this change is pervasive everywhere. So the good thing is we don't have two different models within the auth admin interface called users and user profiles which duplicate the content. We just have one single place which contains the user information. That is the beauty of using stacked inlines and the model based pattern. Now coming back, we need to ensure that each user has a user page. That was one of the original intentions of doing this. So let's go to views. Now in views, we have already used the class based view called list view. Since we are going to see the details of a user, we should probably use another class based view called detail view. And as before, we have to use the user model, so it's handy to copy paste that. And we also need to ensure that user profile has been imported, because we are going to use that as our model. Okay, looks like we have all the required imports to create or derive from the detail view. Let's call this detail view as user profile detail view. Class user profile detail view, and it's derived from detail view. Some of the things we have to define here are that we need a model, which would be user profile, of course. We need to use something called a slug field, which would be passed to us as the username. So this is because usually the slug field is called PK, or the primary key. In this case, Django Registrations already passes something called username. So let's define that. Slug field is username. By the way, slug field is nothing but the key which is used to look up the model. So in this case, the key is the username, which would be unique. The third parameter we need to define is the template name. So let's use a template called user detail, which we will copy soon. And one final bit is that we need to ensure that the user profile, sorry, I think we have a typo here. We need to ensure that the user profile is always created even if we have created signals for it. So as a precautionary measure, we are going to override a built-in class, a built-in function called getObject, so that it always returns, creates the user profile before retrieving the object. So let's quickly add that. self and query set equals none is a standard signature for this particular function. Let's call the super class for detail. In fact, the detail views function. Let's store the return value in user, call super. The name of the class is user profile detail view, and pass the self parameter. We'll call the base get object and pass the query set. And as before, we are going to say user profile objects get or create. User profile dot objects dot get or create, and we're going to pass the user as a parameter. Note that we are not going to do anything with the return value. We are just going to ensure that the user profile is created or it's simply returned. So once we get that, we return the original return value from the base, and we are done. And as a final step, we need to copy this particular template from the goodies pack. So let's do that. So it's called user detail. So let's see if it's there. User detail, and we have copied it to templates. Next, we need to ensure that the URLs that were missing, that Django registration tried to look up and the page was not found, is already present when we actually look for that particular page. So let's go to urls.py and let's create a new URL. In this case, it starts with a very specific syntax that's expected by Django registration. So it's user slash and the slug. So in this case, we're going to say the regular expression syntax is very easy to forget. So it's question mark p slug followed by a couple of non-white space characters followed by a slash, and that's it. We're going to call our view. So in this case, we're going to import that. It's called user profile detail view, and we're going to use that for our URL as view, and we're going to have a name for it, which is the expected name of profile. So we have defined that, and let's try to create a new user again, see if it works. Let's log out and go to accounts.register. Let's create another user called Baz, and click register. So it says you cannot resolve the username into a field, and in this case, let's go back to views. I think we have used the wrong user model here. We should have used get user model, because that's the correct one, which uses the user profile information. And once you have done that, let's again refresh. Okay, so looks like we have created the Baz user, as well as we have seen we can now see his profile. Let's see if we can see the other profiles as well. So we can see foo, we can see admin. So we have successfully created profile pages for each of the user, and this completes the workflow for our Django registration configuration. One final bit of detail that we are missing here is we need to see these links present. We cannot we cannot type these links directly on the URL bar for the browser. It's good if it's appearing on the footer. So we'll probably add that by modifying our templates. So let's quickly do that. Let's go to our base template. In this case, it's under Steel Rumors Templates Base. And let's go to the footer part. And here you can see that you have a logout part, and just after the logout part, we are going to say this is the place where you are if you are already logged in. So it's a good place to mention your username and a link which takes you to your profile page. So let's change this to profile, and let's explicitly pass the slug, which is user.username. And it'll be good to show the name of the user here, so we're going to bolden it, and let's pass user.username. Similarly for login, instead of just simply saying login, let's say register and login in case you are a new user. So how do we do that? Let's use one of the built-in views for register. It's named as registration underscore register, and let's mention it as register here. So having saved the template, let's see if it improves our footer. So as you can see, you can now go to the logged in user directly because it appears on the footer. If you log out, you can see a link called register and login. So looks like we have most of the functionality set for user accounts. The final feature that we are going to cover in this particular tutorial is how you can edit your own profile page. As you must have noticed, we did most of our profile biodata editing using admin interface. We are going to create a custom page for that as well. So as you might expect, we need to create a view in which we can actually edit this particular profile information in the form of a form. We have a class-based view for this as well, and we are going to use the update view. The U for update comes from the CRUD interface, the CRUD set of operations that you usually do on any database object: create, read, update, and delete. So we are going to use the update view for this particular functionality. So let's import it from Django views generic.edit, import update view, and we are going to just check. I think one of this is not required, and we are going to import another URL resolver, which actually takes care of importing from URL resolvers. We are going to take care of reversing. So from django.core URL resolvers import reverse. As you would remember, reverse actually does a reverse lookup of the URL. So let's call our class as user profile edit view. Derived from update view. Now what we have to mention here is the model, as before would be user profile. We have to mention the template name, which is edit profile, and we had to ensure that in the interest of security, that we cannot edit somebody else's profile. So if you are logged in as admin, you cannot go and edit Foo's profile. The only way of ensuring this is to derive get object as before, and unlike the last time we derived get object, we are not going to be concerned with what the query set parameters were. We're simply going to return the currently logged in user's user profile. So let's do that. Let's return user profile dot objects, and to be on the safe side, we are again using get or create. We're going to use user equals request. It's actually self dot request dot user. And if you remember, this particular function returns two return values. So we just need the first one, which is the object, which is the user object, user profile object. Another parameter that we need to define is the success URL. In this case, we can either mention it here as a parameter which says success URL equals, or we can use we can override the function just like we did for get object. According to me, you need to return to the exact profile that you edited. So it's better to use a function. So let's override get success URL. We are going to return the success URL as a reverse lookup. That's why we imported reverse, and use profile named URL. The keyword arguments had to be passed as well, which was the slug. The slug should be the request user, basically the username of the currently logged in user, self.request.user. Now the only problem with update view is that it actually presents you a form with all the attributes in it. So our user profile actually contains the user as a one-to-one field, and it also contains the other profile related information. Now we do not want the user to be appearing in this form. We should not give an option for the logged in user to select who the user should be linked to that particular profile. We simply want that to be excluded. For the current version of update view, the only way to do that is to define a custom form. And in future versions of Django, this would be much easier. They would be using an attribute called fields, but for this version we need to create a new form class. So let's do that. We are going to create a new file called forms.py. Inside forms.py we are going to say import from Django forms, and we're going to use the model user profile. And we're going to define a simple model form called user profile form. In this case, we are going to define a class meta which says which model we are talking about here, and it is user profile. And the important part here is what should be excluded, which is the user field. So once we are done that, we can go back to views and mention this as our model form. So we're going to say from, just after models, we're going to say from forms import user profile form, and we're going to say this as our model form, or this as our form class. User profile form. And once we are done that, update view would no longer show all the fields. It will just show the fields which are defined by our form, our custom form, which excludes the user. So let's see how this works. For that, we need to wire up the URLs in the urls.py. So let's do that. Let's call this as edit profile in our URL, which sounds like a single location for editing your own profile. And you don't need a slug for this because you're going to edit only your profile. And you're going to say user profile. Okay, we have to import that first. User profile edit view. And then say .as view. We're going to give it a name as edit profile. Now, from a security point of view, so far all the URLs were accessible to everybody. This is not ideal when it comes to editing the profile view. You need to ensure that whoever is editing this is authenticated. Basically, only if you're logged in, you should be able to see this view. So we use a special decorator called login required. We first import that from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. I prefer to call this with a shorter name, so I'm going to use as auth, and I'm going to wrap as view using auth. Once you have done that, Django ensures that only if you're authenticated you can actually see this view, or you can edit your profile. So the last bit of thing you have to do is to copy, of course, the template from the goodies pack. So let's do that. Let's copy edit profile. And instead of typing the URL each time into your browser, edit profile, it's better if you have the link already in your template. So let's go to the user detail template and quickly paste a piece of template information just before the end block. It reads as if the object.username equals user.username. Basically, if you are the logged in user that this page specifies, that this profile page says, then just show this edit profile link so that you can directly go to that link. So let's check if this worked by visiting the browser. First, let's log in as admin. You go to your admin page, there you see it, you can edit your profile. So it says that the template does not exist. This is because it is looking for edit profile, not edit profile.html. So let's quickly fix that. Edit profile.html, refresh the page, and there you go. You have the editable version of your profile page, and it should be redirected to the exact page that you were editing, exact object that you were editing. Okay, so now we have come to a fun part of our screencast. We are going to change the template slightly so that we are going to embed a little Easter egg for the amusement of our users. Let's go to the user detail template for that. Inside user detail template, just before the end, we're going to paste a bit of fun. Basically, it will check if the user profile bio contains a string called Zodcat, and it will change the background accordingly. Let's see if this works. Go to the admin page, edit your profile, and add I am Zodcat. And boo, look at the background. So if you go to any other user, you won't find this. And of course, if you edit your profile and say you're the boring admin again, then you lose it. So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Screencast. Stay tuned for the next part. Keep sending your comments and your feedback. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a good day.